collapsing emergency services, acute food insecurity, and continued Israeli attacks. Welcome to Gaza under a ceasefire. The United Nations warns nowhere is safe in the Gaza Strip. But with the world's eyes turned elsewhere, massive human rights and ceasefire violations are falling under the radar. So has the genocide been stopped? And where is diplomacy? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Gaza. On what seems like a daily basis, reports are filed documenting more deaths in Gaza. On Tuesday, a family of 6, including 4 children, were added to the more than 73,000 Palestinians killed since Israel launched its assault almost 3 years ago. 90% of Gaza's infrastructure has been destroyed. But under a ceasefire declared last year, some level of rebuilding was supposed to begin, and the bombings were supposed to stop. Instead, humanitarian workers, activists, and journalists say the opposite has happened, leaving Palestinians subjected to starvation, disease, and aid blockages. They're also losing more and more land under increasing Israeli occupation. Here's a look.
The ceasefire was supposed to change life in Gaza. Instead, it is changing the map. Israeli military operations continue to kill civilians across Gaza. Survivors are left to navigate deepening hunger, repeated displacement, and a homeland that continues to shrink.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian population in Gaza remains trapped in an ever-shrinking area, with the yellow line constantly being moved westwards by the Israeli occupying power, presenting a continuous threat to life as the Israeli military appears to routinely fire on Palestinians for mere presence in the vicinity of that line.
Central to that reality is the steady expansion of the so-called Yellow Line. Originally introduced as a temporary military boundary, it has continued moving westwards, forcing civilians into increasingly overcrowded areas. Israeli forces have also reinforced their presence with new military positions and earth barriers, tightening their control over large parts of the enclave. And as the space available to Palestinians shrinks, so do the conditions needed to survive. Aid agencies warn hunger is deepening, access to clean water continues to deteriorate, and disease is spreading through overcrowded shelters. Hospitals, already operating under extreme pressure, are struggling to cope as Gaza's humanitarian crisis worsens.
Every day they besiege us, and every day there are attacks and assassinations. There is no such thing as a ceasefire. The ceasefire is just news in a written statement, but on the ground, no one feels for us.
The changing reality on the ground is also complicating efforts to plan Gaza's future. After months of limited progress, the US-backed Board of Peace has scaled back its ambitions. It is now proposing a pilot zone in Rafah, instead of the broader post-war governance and reconstruction plan it once envisioned. But questions remain over how the body was formed, who it represents, and whose vision for Gaza it is ultimately designed to deliver.
The sort of people involved in the Board of Peace, the actual personnel and their inclinations and so on, are all very, it's a bit murky, and it hasn't really been helpful to getting peace forward. I mean, it's, the Board of Peace very much represents a sort of US and Israeli view of how the future of Gaza should look.
For Palestinians, the ceasefire has brought neither safety nor stability. It created a questionable diplomatic process, not a different reality.
So what is the ceasefire really worth today, and how dangerous is the fact that Gaza is no longer receiving the international attention it once had? Well, joining me now to debate that are here in the studio, Palestinian author and activist Laila el-Haddad. From occupied East Jerusalem, Executive Director of the human rights organization HaMoked, Tal Steiner. And hopefully joining us later in the program, from London, Professorial Research Associate at SOAS, Haim Bresheeth. Thanks all so much for being with me. Laila, I'll start in the studio with you. We're coming up on a year since the ceasefire was declared. What do you want the world to really know about what's happening in Gaza?
Well, very little has changed, I would say, on the ground. Materially speaking, the only thing that the ceasefire has managed to accomplish is really a change in the pace and the ferocity of Israeli attacks. But the killing very much continues. Since the ceasefire was declared, well over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel. A quarter of those, according to UNICEF, have been children. And so really, I think with the media's attention focused elsewhere, it provides Israel with the cover that it needs, kind of a smokescreen, not only to continue the killing, but to continue to try to implement its ultimate objectives vis-a-vis the Palestinians and Gaza, to continue to carve it out, to control it, to create conditions that make life unsustainable there, to encourage either voluntary transfer, to thin, euphemistically, the population through making the conditions unlivable, encouraging involuntary transfer, or just simply expelling the Palestinians and continuing to control as much of the territory as possible.
We're talking about almost 3 years now, and not considering everything that happened prior to October 7th, but these 3 years of what seems like just relentless attacks, constant choking of even basic supplies. What is left of Gaza now, and what can actually recover? If this were to, perhaps even stop tomorrow, how long would it take to get any part of Gaza back to what you remember?
Oh, it's a very painful question, honestly. I'm trying to think where to start with this one. I feel like in a way we're putting the cart before the horse here, the carriage before the horse, because without addressing the conditions that Israel has created and the problem, of course, being that Israel is actively stifling and preventing the ability of Palestinians in Gaza to develop and to have any kind of meaningful, sustainable development or progress, then we can't realistically, meaningfully talk about any kind of development or progress, right? All of these sort of fanciful pipe dreams or, are very dystopian, whether the Board of Peace and the Gaza Riviera and so on and so forth. Right now, out of a 600, I think the UN estimates that you need 600 trucks of aid to enter Gaza to meet just the basic humanitarian needs of the 2.2 million Palestinians that live there. Only 100 trucks are entering, and very little of that is accessible to most of the population, of course. Fuel is still severely restricted. People can't really move around to access the aid and to get it. And that's just to meet their basic humanitarian needs. This is not even to speak about the territory itself. 70% of the Gaza Strip is now under direct internal Israeli control. And this is something that Israeli leadership talked about very openly. So we should have taken what they're saying at face value, right from the horse's mouth, when they said that their objective was ultimately to carve up Gaza, to control as much of it as possible, to sort of thin the population, and they're doing exactly that. And so 2.2 million Palestinians are now crammed into this tiny area, 30% of the former territory of the Gaza Strip, and only a fraction of that, 1.5%, is left for Palestinians to actually be able to farm and feed themselves with because of the engineered collapse of the food sector.
I feel dystopian really is the best adjective we have right now. And Tal, as Laila was saying, without attention from world leaders as well as the global media, who've obviously turned most of their attention now to Iran or even back toward Ukraine, what happens to Palestine, including as well to the West Bank and the injustices being ignored there?
Well, as Laila described very aptly, Palestine is being forgotten, and the human suffering that is ongoing all of the time in Gaza and also in the West Bank is allowed to continue. Israeli policies are implemented on the ground including the shortage or blockade of humanitarian access, all movement restrictions, including medical evacuations, of course, the situation of Palestinian detainees. Over 9,000 Palestinian detainees remain in Israeli custody. All of that remains unchanged and in fact worsens, because as people are made to live in such horrible conditions year in, year out, their situation worsens.
Tal, Haim actually has joined us now. Haim, so glad you could be with us. You know, we have an election approaching in Israel, and perhaps the biggest complaint we're hearing from the Israeli public is so sadly for Palestinians, that Netanyahu might not win because he didn't get the job done. Not that he went too far. Not that everything that Laila and Tal is describing in Gaza is actually a problem with the Israeli public. So, I mean, is that set to change? Because it seems only Israeli public pressure could get the approach of the Israeli government toward Palestine to budge at all.
Please do not believe for a moment that solutions will come from Israel and the Israeli public. The only topic on which the Israeli public is at one and united is its agreement on the genocide in Gaza. This was the case from the 7th of October, and it still is the case now. So anyone waiting for change coming from Israel is making a very serious mistake. The change should come from the UN, from the other countries in the UN, and from those who understand that the US is actually serving everything that Israel is trying to affect. And that is why waiting for Israel is total, it has no sense in it.
Okay.
Israel wants to remove everyone from Gaza and to colonize it. That's why, of course, the Board of Peace has not started any work whatsoever. They haven't cleared the ground for the ISF. They haven't built anything from the ISF. They haven't rebuilt a single, unit for Palestinians to live in.
And that's by
design.
design.
They are not going to do it.
Okay.
And the great plan, the grand plan, was already left behind.
I just wanted to bring Tal back in on that and ask if you hold out any more hope.
I don't know if you can hear me.
From the Israeli public than Haim. Or are you on the same page there?
Unfortunately, the numbers are very close to what Haim is describing. A majority of the Israeli Jewish society supports the war in Gaza, even stands behind extreme language, such as there are no innocent people in Gaza, or after October 7th, whatever Israel does in Gaza is justified. This has been proven also by scientific polling. What I do hope for is that there are people on the other side too. The Israeli public, I think, is tired, is run out of a sequence of wars in Gaza, then Lebanon and elsewhere, and is also sick in some kind of normality back. And also, I think the Israeli public very much is aware of the international pressure mounting, of Israel becoming more and more of a pariah. I think that is very much felt on the individual level as well. And for those reasons, I think that there is a chance that after the election, another government is elected and some of those policies begin to change, not from a standpoint of peace and human rights, but rather from really the fatigue that people are feeling of the situation as it is. That's the most I think we can hope for at this point.
Right. And that is to say that, it's not that the majority of Israelis feel that something is wrong with what they tried to achieve, but that they're just tired of trying to achieve those ends. And that is quite tragic. Let me come back to Laila, though, because, you know, as we complain about the fact that the media has kind of dropped the ball on this now, because in their defense, there is so much happening now. There are so many moving parts. We now have these kind of social media campaigns. One of them is called "They Lied to You."
Right.
It's gaining some traction. I mean, is social media kind of the only hope you have for media, period? Because it does have reach. It does have reach. And do you think more people are at least discovering that this is still happening and we still need those voices to stand up to try to stop it?
Yeah, there's something to be said about that. I mean, for sure, the tragedy, of course, is that this was the first live stream genocide in history, and one in which Palestinians themselves, you know, have the unique obligation of informing the world what is happening and providing the coverage themselves, which is why, of course, they take offense at the fact that people say things like, if only they will allow the media in, then the world will be moved to act, and then the world's governments will intervene, which is completely ludicrous. And so I do think that that is part of it. They, on one hand, have to simply survive to feed themselves in impossible conditions, and on the other, continue to keep their plight very much alive and in the limelight. But I don't necessarily absolve the media, and certainly not the Western media, from responsibility, because they very much manufactured consent for this genocide that is ongoing. And suddenly Gaza was no longer the story to them, and they've moved on, when the reality is all of these issues are very much interconnected, whether it's Iran or Lebanon or Gaza. And my fear personally is that now we've returned to a situation in Gaza, to an unsustainable status quo that I personally saw happening, developing, evolving over the course of the past 17 years, both when I was there and outside of it, in which Israel described what it referred to as the tenets of its blockade at the time as no development, no prosperity, no humanitarian crisis, meaning it was allowing in enough aid at the time to meet the very basic minimum caloric needs of the population, while making sure to stifle any kind of meaningful development or the population from prospering in any way. And that is exactly the situation we are in today. Of course, we attained full-blown humanitarian crisis, but now they've kind of dialed it back to be able to say, hey, look, you know, no media outcry, don't pay attention, all is well now with Gaza. We're allowing in all this aid, when again, the reality is it's neither sustainable nor realistic.
Yeah. Haim, let me come back to you and ask you more of a personal question. If you obviously don't have hope in the larger Israeli public, there is what some people hold out as hope in the few Israelis that you say there are, plus the diaspora, like yourself, who will take a stand, who will decry what is happening. And yet you face this criticism, especially in you know, among US government officials, that will say you should be ignored because you are the self-loathing Israelis, the self-loathing Jews that don't speak in the greater Israeli interest. How do you convince them that you actually are on the right side of the equation, and the right side, you believe, of history?
I think we are on the right side of history. Jews elsewhere, outside of Israel, have to divorce, to use Naomi Klein's phrase, have to divorce themselves of the Israeli connection and work with the Palestinians for liberating Palestine, for ending Zionism, for ending the racist, supremacist Israeli state. But we can't do it on our own. We need the world to do what it did in South Africa. In South Africa, the whole of the UN united to eject and expel South Africa from the UN and from any other international body. We don't see that at all. So to think that the diaspora, which on the whole, the Jewish diaspora, is still supporting Israel. Most of the Jewish diaspora is still supporting Israel. There is a very growing minority, which I am part of, who are anti-Zionist, who are against all Israeli crimes, but we are not, like the Palestinians, getting support from the international community. What is the UN for if not to remove Israel as a member, like it did remove South Africa as a member? And frankly, what South Africa did to the black population was really like a cocktail party in comparison to what Israel has done. So I think what we miss here is not the Jewish diaspora, though, I mean, a lot of them are still supporting the genocide. What we miss is the international community in action. Instead of actually handing it to the so-called Board of Peace that does nothing at all, they should actually deal with it with the UN. The ISF, the separation force that was supposedly part of the Board of Peace duties, is not there. Israel is allowed to continue reducing the Palestinians to smaller and smaller parts of Gaza. Laila is totally right. The international media should not be let off on this, because the international media is playing along with Israel and the US.
Okay.
So I don't think that you can look to either the Israelis, because they are totally supportive of their government. And if the government changes after elections, they will support any other government with the same policies.
Okay.
A new government might actually look better than Netanyahu, and that's easy, but it's not going to do anything for the Palestinians.
Okay. Tal, let me come back to you. If you had some personal sentiment on the question that I put to Haim initially, do go ahead. But I also need to ask you where you think the diplomatic process stands now, and where is the Board of Peace that Washington said would, take responsibility for implementing the Gaza peace plan and rebuilding?
Well, first of all, I want to distance somewhat from what Haim has said. Not all of us believe that the state of Israel should be dismantled. This is definitely not my goal and not the organization that I represent goal. Our goal is to protect human lives and to protect human rights and to contribute to Palestinian resilience. It's not to dismantle political entities such as there are, definitely not of the state of Israel. To your question on the diplomatic efforts such as there are right now, I think as we are approaching the election, we do sense some kind of stagnation, sitting on the fence, if you will, trying to figure out what the next government would look like and what avenues would be open, because as we are hearing in diplomatic channels, the current government is quite desensitized to international pressure of any kind. And as long as it has the United States backing, then it feels also emboldened to continue regardless of international diplomatic pressure and others. So I definitely do agree with Haim that more pressure is needed now and also after the election, because as we are saying to international interlocutors, a new government does not necessarily mean an end to the siege on Gaza, does not necessarily mean elevated living conditions in prisons or not even less violence in the West Bank. All of those measures have to be put forward to Israel as necessities by the entire international community to make sure that they are in fact elevated at one point in time.
Okay. Laila, let's come back to the studio then, because I need to ask what you make of whatever diplomatic structures remain in place to help try and resolve this. Some are saying that the Board of Peace has really only succeeded in pushing other organizations out of the process, as per Trump's goal of marginalizing the United Nations, for example, as much as possible. So how much hope do you have for the diplomatic process here?
Very little. I think, if anything, Gaza was really an inflection point. The genocide was an inflection point that showed us the limits of the rules-based order, the limits of the United Nations, and really has become our moral compass. And I absolutely agree. The Board of Peace is a huge farce. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. I believe that change will come from the outside in, from the bottom up, that it will be the people, global movements, and so on, that are going to have to continue to pressure their own governments to affect change, because governments, in the end of the day, are moved by national interest and power, right? Not by empathy. So they could see, the unfortunate reality is all the dead babies in the world, not to be crass, but these to me are, my aunts, my uncles, my family. To governments, it means nothing. And so without more pressure, without, holding Israel accountable, making these actions undesirable, then the killing will continue, unfortunately. And then there's one final point here, which is, of course, all of this obfuscates the very important point about Palestinian basic fundamental rights are completely ignored, right? They're absent in this equation. They have no voice, whether it's in the Board of Peace or otherwise, when we sometimes get bogged down in the metrics of do they have enough aid or food and the diplomatic process and so on. Unfortunately, we're missing sort of the forest for the trees here and completely forgetting that there's human beings here whose fundamental rights are systematically being denied in all of this.
Laila, el-Haddad, Tal Steiner, Haim Bresheeth, I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with me on this edition of the Newsmakers. Our viewers as well, remember you can follow us on social media. And do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm Andrea Sankey, and we will see you on the next edition.